so many people don't have this financial education, right? When I was growing up, the only way that I could think of money was cash, right? And I would hear about Bill Gates and how he has like 50-60 billion back then. I was thinking, oh, this guy must have so much money into the bank, right? Into probably a savings account, or I don't know, where does he hold so much money? But the problem is that all of the richest people, most of them, they don't have cash, right? They probably have around 0.5% of their wealth into cash. And why is that? Because cash is a very, very bad way to hold your money, right? So how do these people get so rich, and how do they keep their wealth, and how over time they get wealthier and wealthier? That happens is because the biggest part of their net worth comes from shares and equity into companies and real estate. And that's the truth. And let's look at Wikipedia, the world's billionaires index. And for 2018, right, we have Jeff Bezos at $112 billion, right? But source of wealth is Amazon, right? And how does that happen? Well, he has quite big percentage of the shares of Amazon, and Jeff Bezos last year was on third place and had 72.8 billion, and we can see that for a year from 72 he has gone up to 112. And the way that happens is because when we look at the Amazon stock price, in 1 year it has gone up 96%. And of course, since he's invested into Amazon, his net worth skyrockets. So that's how all the richest peoples have their money, right? And we can see Bill Gates, source of wealth, Microsoft, Warren Buffett, Berkshire Hathaway, Bernard Arnault's LVMH, which is basically a lot of brands, including Louis Vuitton, Mark Zuckerberg, Facebook, Amancio Ortega, Zara, and so on and so forth. So why is investing and having equity so important? Because of the alternatives are really bad, right? What are the main two alternatives? Cash and holding your money into a savings account, into a bank. So first I want to discuss cash and why holding cash is actually quite bad. Because cash by design is inflationary object. Cash is made so that there is inflation. And then there is amazing video by the amazing DALIO that explains how economy works in about 30 minutes. It's very easy to understand. It's brilliant. I'll put a link into the description of this video and you can go watch it and understand how economy works. So in order for economy to grow, you need inflation, and when the inflation is controlled, is actually very good. And I'm gonna read a bit about that. What's behind inflation? That's on Investopedia. Inflation comes about as demand for goods and services grows in an economy. As the money supply in the economy rises, there is likely to be more demand from customers looking to buy various goods. The rising demand creates a pressure on prices and they rise. As more people are willing to pay for these goods, sellers hike up their prices. Another situation that could lead to inflation is when there is an increase in the cost of production. So overall, growing economy, having more money means that there is inflation. But let's look at the effect of inflation. Let's say you have $100 into a savings account that pays a 1% interest rate. After a year, you'll have $101 into your account. During this period, if inflation runs 2%, you would have to have $102 to make up the impact of the higher prices. Since you have $101, that means that you have actually lost 1% of your purchasing power, which means that if you hold cash, you are vulnerable to inflation. If you hold cash over time, even though that the number of how much money you have doesn't change, your actual buying power decreases. Over time, you lose your buying power. Another thing that's very important about cash is that you are subjected to swings into the price compared to other currencies, because when you have cash, you probably have mainly into one currency. Let's look at the pound against the dollar. Into a period of 4 years, the pound has lost over 24, even over 25% of its value, which means that people that had thousands of pounds, back in 2014, now, even though they still have these £1,000, their buying power against the dollar is 25% lower. In the same time, remember that inflation is also compounding at around 1 to 2% per year, which means that these £1,000, if they want to buy something from America, now can buy them probably somewhere around 35 to 40% less than what they could buy just 4 years ago. So these people lost more than 30% of their buying power in a short span of 4 years. So in short, if you're holding cash over time, you are losing buying power because of inflation, and compounded with that, you lose power because it's very probable that your currency might lose value against other currencies. What about savings accounts, right? This is the second option which a lot of people go about, and this was my mindset. And the problem with that, and why this video is so important, is because if you don't have someone that's doing finance or business or entrepreneur into your family and around you, it's very hard to get out of this mindset. I didn't know anything about net worth, about shares, about equity, how inflation affects you, and how you can make use of that and turn your money to work for you instead of you losing your buying power. The second thing that gets so many people is savings accounts. And we know that banks, these are some of the highest rates of savings account. We see that they're around 1.8% per year. But if we look at the actual inflation per year, we can see that in US it is between 2 to 2.8% in the last 2-3 years, which means that if you hold your money into a savings account, you still lose buying power because of inflation. The second thing is you're still subjected to swings into currencies. And the third thing is most banks will not let you actually withdraw money or, handle your money, which means that you don't even have access, to your own funds. Let's talk about why investing is so good. So this is a chart of the S&P 500 index, which basically tracks the 500 biggest companies in US, which are basically some of the biggest companies in the world overall, which means that it is a quite good indicator what the stock market overall is doing. So we can see here, I've opened the all-time chart of the S&P 500, and what we could observe is that at any period over 15 years, the stock market is higher than where it was before that. And into a very big percentage of the time, in every period of 5 to 10 years, the stock market is higher than it was. And we can follow that from 1950 to 2018. If you invest into the S&P 500, which means that it's super simple, right? You invest into an index. You don't have to choose companies. You don't need to understand companies. You just invest into the economy, right? Because this basically tracks the economy. If you invest into just the economy, into an index, let's see what happens. So if I opened here a kind of reverse compound calculator, and here I have calculated the interest rate that you would gain if you had invested in S&P 500 back in 1950 when it began. So I want to see how much on all the data that we have over time, how much is the interest rate. And we can see that back into 1950, basically the S&P started at around 16.9, and now in 2018 it is at 2,850. This is 68.6 years, and we are calculating the annual interest rate. And we can see that we get an annual appreciation of 7.76%. 7.76%. With inflation, we said at around 2% at the moment, right? So, okay, but let's look at some more interesting stuff, okay? Let's look at if you're invested exactly at the best possible time at the downturn into the 2008 crisis. If we look at this, back in 2008, the S&P was around 683, and now, as we said, it's at 2,850. And that's it into a time frame of 9.5 years. We can see that this is a gain of 16.3% per year, with a savings account giving you 1.8 and with cash giving you 0, right? So we can see the difference. And you would say, yes, but nobody can time the market, right? That's what you say all the time. Like, nobody can invest at the best time. And I say, okay, let's look, what if you invest at the worst time? Okay, if you invested exactly at the top before the crisis and you never sold, stayed invested into the index. Let's see what happens, okay? The peak here before the crisis is around 1,550-60. And as we said, now we're at 2,850, and that's almost 11 years. What we get as a gain if you invested at the worst time in the last 10 years, you still get 5.7 compounded interest rate per year. 5.7, which means that you cover your inflation rate and you still get 3.7% gain of buying power per year. What is even better is that stocks have something called dividend yield, which means that stocks give you back money just to hold them. And on average, the S&P 500 companies, which is what you'll be invested in, have a dividend yield, as we see in the last 20 years, of around 2%. Overall, over time, it's been actually much higher, but let's take the last 2%, which means that on top of this 5.7% compound interest rate, when you put 2% up, you get 7.7, right? This is the worst time. If we take the 7.7%, which is on the all-time average interest rate, and you put 2%, that's 9.7% historically on average you would get as a gain if you invested just into basically the economy of United States. And here I have opened a very simple compound interest calculator. What if you started right now with $0? You get your 9.7% annual rate because you invest into the S&P 500, and you save $500 per month for 30 years. And the numbers that we get are actually really, really interesting. Into the first 10 years, starting from zero and investing into the S&P 500, you have $100,000. In 20 years, you have $368. And into 30 years, you have over $1 million saved. That's how all the rich people have money. That's how they become richer. And that's why over time the richer become richer, because they invest their money. They don't hold them cash. They don't spend them on stupid stuff that loses value. They invest them. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this video. Comment on anything you want to down into the comments, and also consider checking out my Patreon page, which is on patreon.com/Entiversal, where you can support the channel so I can create more and also access quite interesting content about investing, technology, mindset, and anything else. Thank you for listening. See you next time.